There were some suggestions, as in the writing type. Like I don't think we use bold, and a few there were a few typos. So I just drop in the suggestions, right?
Are we talking about like request reply stuff?
Correct. I
Yes.
noticed some typos and some things that I'm not so sure about. So I just
Yeah, feel free to add any suggestions. A lot has been changed, so I don't know if it's still relevant, but check it out, yeah.
Okay, so Jonas, I think I signed in to a stream and I think I do connect to OBS Zoom and then I do the titles, right?
Yeah, yes. Yeah, restream. Like change the stuff on restream and then go live, yeah. But now that you are live, I'm not sure you can actually change the titles.
Uh-oh. Let me see if I can.
Yep.
Well, I can dream. I'm trying to see if I can change it or not.
Yep. Otherwise, it's fine.
I think so. All right, looks like I did it right now. Okay. So I think we're live. I think everything looks good. I'm on YouTube. Yep, looks like we are live on. I think everything looks YouTube as well. So, yay! Thank goodness we're live. And I can't believe I'm going to say this, but it wouldn't have happened without Jonas's help. Can't believe it. I'm complimenting Jonas. What a day.
Yes. Oh, yeah. I'm savoring this moment.
As you should. Might not happen again for a while.
Exactly.
All right, cool. So today it's going to be a little bit different. I know that sometimes we use this time to go through like major Spec 3 questions, or at least up until now, that's been what we've been doing. But that said, I did notice that several of our writers who are, I think, doing a good job of implementing just Spec 3 into their work. So I think that's going very well. And then we have, of course, extra documentation that Jonas just provided for us, I think just yesterday, extra information on request reply, which is a big change coming with Spec 3. So now that we have even more additional documentation, thanks to Jonas, then we have even more context. So I think we're actually like on a really good track. I can already tell that a lot of the writers are feeling unblocked. And now we're just doing like, the typical growth, I forgot the word in English, growth pain, where we are identifying like, okay, this writer's blocked. Oh, they need a call with an engineer. Let's really make sure we figure out our specific questions and, get that one-on-one help. So I think that's all going very well. But something that we did identify and actually Sergio kind of brought up to me was he did feel concerned that some of the pull requests we were receiving could come across as more, I hate to say this word, a little plagiarized. I said the dirty word, plagiarism. But I don't think that any of our writers are plagiarizing on purpose. I think that this new era of artificial intelligence and the tools that we use to clean up our writing and improve our writing, it can become a little bit nebulous to understand where to draw the line. Like, how do you know how to cite properly a resource? How do you know how much information you can grab from ChatGPT? And to what extent do you need to rewrite something to be able to claim it as your own so that it's no longer a source? For example, something directly generated from ChatGPT or Find or whatever chat model or AI tool you might be using. Can you folks hear me okay? Okay, good. My dogs are fighting in the background, so I wasn't sure if that noise is bothering you. Great, it's only me. Awesome. Okay. Well, so swept away because something was about to start burning on the stove. So I needed to save my house. So what I was thinking was, I think it would be very beneficial. I think we actually really need to sit down and have a conversation about what plagiarism is and how to avoid plagiarism. I don't think I am perfect. I don't think I am like the know-it-all expert of what is and what is not plagiarism, but I do think I have some good knowledge to share that could be helpful and beneficial to at least get us started. And ideally, we can all continue learning and growing together, because yeah, it's another thing that we have to worry about. You know, it's not always fun. All right, so let me first start by opening. I'm going to start screen sharing in 1 second. All right, so, and you let me know in a moment if you can see my screen or not. Can you see my screen okay? All right, cool. All right, so let's start with literally the simplest way. Let's Google it. I know people still use Google. What is plagiarism? So at the very basics of the meaning is presenting somebody else's work as your own without giving them proper credit, without citing them. So of course, when we're talking about artificial intelligence, it's a little bit harder because it's not like a human wrote something and we are directly on purpose copy and pasting and stealing somebody's work. It's a little bit more gray because we know that chat models, we don't even know the chat models itself with all the data that they have fed into them, how much of that has been stolen, right? We don't know how much of the information we get generated from artificial intelligence tools is in itself plagiarism. Like that in itself is a running conversation in our communities, right? So we need to be aware of the fact that the very tools we are using already are making mistakes in plagiarism themselves. So the first step is to understand just how far the problem goes. It's not just you, the human, the writer, it's also the tools that we are using that accidentally can make it easier for us to make this mistake. So do be aware that even a chat model is considered work that must be cited. Yes, it's not human, but it still needs to be cited. And that is because, and I think I'll just Google this, why do we need to cite artificial intelligence sources? You know, because maybe we're wondering like, what's the difference? It's not a human, right? Why is it important? University of Waterloo. Let's see what they have to say. So essentially, we need the readers to understand where your information is coming from. This also helps for fact checking, right? Like anyone can write a document and accidentally write something that is factually incorrect. So if we make sure to cite our information properly, then when we make a mistake in our documentation, we can find out easily where this information, where this mistake came from, because we made sure to cite our information and our resources properly. There's also a strong ethical component to using citations. And again, that includes both robot models and actual humans. Now, let's talk about how can you cite a model? How do you cite a model? What is the appropriate way to do that? Well, believe it or not, we can sometimes ask directly the tool that we are using, what is the appropriate way to cite resources and content from it that we're using directly and not rewriting. So I want to find out what is the appropriate way to cite content generated from ChatGPT. So I'm going to ask. All right. And as you can see, there is definitely, it'll depend on which style guide you are following. So writers, if you're familiar with different sort of style guides, like the Chicago style guide, the MLA style guide. Those are like very, very famous style guides. If you're not really in the writing world, you might be like, what in the hell is she talking about? I think that's Jonas's face right now. He's like, I don't know what she's talking about. I don't care. This looks boring. It's not code. I don't care. So first of all, it is ideal for you to utilize a basic template where you inform the reader who is the author, like human author, or in this case, it's not a human author. So the source in this case is OpenAI. So it's not as simple as, it's a better practice to not just write, generated from ChatGPT. It is a better practice to say the direct source, and the actual direct source is not ChatGPT, but OpenAPI, the organization behind ChatGPT. Then you want to make sure that you clarify what content it is that you are directly using. So if you use the code snippet, that was just like so perfect and so detailed, like not a generic example, but you got a very detailed example and you want to use it pretty much as is. And let's just pretend it's so perfect, there's nothing to change. Then in that case, you are directly using the same content, the same code snippet. And if it's not a basic example, then you do need to clarify what is the type of content. So you would clarify, code snippet that does whatever. And then it is also ideal if you clarify like the date or the URL. The URL and the date is not as important, but it is kind of helpful in artificial intelligence in the sense that, as you know, as time progresses, the model version will change, right? So like 3.5, and now we have ChatGPT 4, and we'll see what else comes along the line, right? So it is actually a good practice to, if you're citing ChatGPT as an example, you should be citing which model you're using. So did you use 3.5 or did you use version 4? So that's actually something that is a good idea. Now, when we're thinking about other AI tools, I do think that in general, whether you're using Find or whatever AI tool you're using, in general, this template is like a really good source of truth. The author, the source, right, the type of code or the type of written content, the topic that you're writing about, the date, and the URL. So you, in this case, I would just give a URL directly to OpenAI, for example. Maybe chatopenai.com could be an okay URL, but maybe it would be more professional to just directly link to OpenAI and not just to the chat GPT. So that's a quick example. Now, I also want to talk a little bit about what are things that come across or count as plagiarism. And I've made many of these mistakes myself in my career. It's not fun to learn the hard way. Sometimes you make a mistake, then a manager comes up and says, like, did you plagiarize this? And you're like, no, I really didn't think I did. I thought I actually did that myself. But turns out that plagiarism is very specific in what you can and cannot do. So what are some things that count as plagiarism? Well, I think that a lot of people assume that plagiarism is only copy and pasting all of this content, and then say, like, let's pretend I'm, talking here. Well, actually, I was talking to Jonas. So, blah, 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 yada, yada. And then, I want to share this great information with Jonas, tell him to add this to his pull request. And I just give that to him and he just uses that directly. And he doesn't mention anything about how this is directly generated and directly copy and pasted from ChatGPT. He uses this in his pull request. We merged this live. Oh my God, definitely plagiarism. So I think a lot of folks only think of this as plagiarism, and they haven't really learned beyond that what else to watch out for. So that's kind of what I want us to think about as well. So what else counts as plagiarism? Well, believe it or not, it's not as simple as just grabbing this and maybe rewriting a few sentences here and there. Like if I grab this and I wanted to not plagiarize in my conversation with Jonas, it's not enough to simply change a few words like, oh, you know what, I'm going to remove the word please and say, note that providing a URL. There, I changed a word. It's mine. No, hell no, because you have to actually like really go through all of the sentences and all of the content that you added, whether it's code snippet, and really think about how to rewrite it, use your own words. And keep in mind, and I've mentioned this to the writing groups before, one function of ChatGPT, which I think a lot of us that use it love it, is if you write content and then throw it in here and ask it to clean it up for grammatical issues and mistakes, it's a really useful grammatical tool that will clean up basic issues, and it'll definitely make your text sound a little bit more professional. It'll clean it up. But be careful of not relying too heavily on that, because when ChatGPT like rewrites and improves your text, it does tend to use very like fancy, jargony, big word type of things. And when you think about it, in documentation, that's definitely like the opposite. That's what we want to avoid. We don't want to have documentation that is full of big, complicated words, jargon that only like the star contributors that work in Spec specifically know what's going on. Like documentation should be understood by anyone, even a student in high school who's questioning their career goals. Like they should be able to go to Async API docs, read our docs and be like, this makes sense to me. I can check this out, even though I've never used Async API and I don't know anything about EDAs. So you really need to make sure of that and think about how you display your content. What do I mean by that? So for example, this could be considered more of paragraph format, right? But when we're talking about writing, as some of you probably know, there's different ways to display content. You could be displaying, you could be creating a ordered list. You could have an unordered list. You could have a table. You could have a diagram. There are different ways to display data, written data. It's not just paragraph format. So here's another example of plagiarism. And let's pretend, and this is actually like a story that happened to me. Let's pretend that your manager, your technical writing manager, told you to write a document about, can't wrote. How do you write cockroach? Trying to remember, there we go, Cockroach Labs. I was trying to remember the name of the DB. So I want to go to Cockroach Labs and I'm looking actually for their docs because this is like a specific example that happened. Here we go. This looks like documentation. Yes. Okay, cool. Documentation. So I'm just going to click on something here. Okay, now let's pretend that I was hired for a database company. And I'm not going to tell you which database company, like whatever, just pretend. And this company is a direct competitor of Cockroach Labs. This happened to me. So my manager told me, I need you to read all the documentation in Cockroach Labs about this area, because this is a feature that we're building. And then I want you to write the documentation for us, you know, how our feature works. And remember what are like the selling points that Cockroach Labs has, and keep that in mind when you write our documentation, because our feature has a lot of the same cool stuff. So we want people to know this and not think that only Cockroach Labs has these features. So, you know, I went to Cockroach Labs, I read the section they told me to study and identified like the cool features that it had to make sure that I made the same notes in mine. And when I came back, my manager was upset and said, I feel like this looks very plagiarized. Why did she say that? So she was actually not just referring to like the words, she was referring to the way I displayed my data. So here we see, for example, in this documentation that there is a title, then there is a little bit of text, not even a paragraph really, it's just like 2 sentences. And then we have an ordered list and a note. So bear with me, stay with me. What I presented to my manager also had a title, a paragraph explaining the feature, introducing the feature in the document. And then because I was showcasing like the different features that this thing had, I also had a bullet list of points to cover. And it just so happened that there was a limitation in our, our product that we were working on. So then I thought, you know what? And it also makes sense for me to add a note as well, because I should clarify that our feature does have this limitation. I presented this to the manager and she explained to me, well, when you look at Cockroach Labs here, look at how they have data presented the same way. They have text, then they have bullet points, and then they also have a note. So it almost looks like you literally copied what they had and then just replaced it with information about our product. So in this case, I hadn't copied any words from Cockroach Labs because I wasn't writing about Cockroach Labs, right? I was writing about another product. And yet it was still counted or looked as plagiarism because of the way that I was displaying my content. And so that's another important piece of plagiarism that a lot of folks are not aware of. Yes, it's not just copying and pasting the direct words that you grab from an article or that was generated by some chat model. It's also about the source that you are referencing for your writing. If you are directly using, like displaying the content like in the same exact way that the previous article does, that also counts as plagiarism. Now, I hope that some of you are starting to think, oh my God, wait a minute. Then to avoid any semblance of plagiarism, that sounds like a lot of work. Like even the way I display things could be counted as plagiarism just because it looks similar, because it had some bullet points. And so, yes, 1 second, Ridesh. So what I honestly recommend for anyone who wants to contribute any form of written content, especially documentation, which is a little bit more professional than just a blog post, is make sure that you are also adding to your, like I always set time aside to learn new things, like in my career or in my job. So I would add to your list to spend some time to identify and research more about what is plagiarism and how to avoid it. So I just gave you a quick introduction here, but what are other sources that you would want to check out? So I am going to Google that as well, because I want to kind of show you like how to do this yourselves. How to avoid plagiarism. All right. So yes, there are going to be all these 5 easy methods to avoid plagiarism. Like this is like the Grammarly blog. This is definitely useful, like don't get me wrong. But I would like you to really look for professional sources. So in this case, like MIT definitely is a more professional source. UCLA, like an actual university, that is definitely a professional resource for you to study and identify what is considered as plagiarism. Then, of course, there are very famous style guides, such as the Chicago Style Guide. So another thing that I would do is literally Google Chicago Manual of Style, because it is one of the most detailed and professional ones out there. You're bound to get the information you need here. And then here it looks like Google made it easy for me to go and directly identify the section of their style, their guide for plagiarism. And here we see some more information. So this is like the very basics that any technical writer should be doing. Take the time to research on yourself and also learn more about plagiarism. Don't just spend time learning about how to write, because this is a piece of writing. Just like you have to learn how to be an editor, you have to learn how to be a researcher in technical writing. Well, you also have to learn how to actually understand what plagiarism is, how to avoid it, and how to properly cite your resources. I did know that Ridesh had her hand raised.
So just a small question. In the previous example regarding the cockroach DB, right? If we still had the same format, then how did you solve the problem? How did you present your data? So it was not actually plagiarized, but still, because the way cockroach DB did it is very simple, basic, and to the point. So I want to know how you did it. So it was again simple, basic, and to the point.
Yeah, that's a great question. Because you know what, Ridesh, and I know you didn't say this specifically aloud, but I feel that your point also is there's also only so many ways you can write content sometimes. And so in the moment you're wondering, what do you do, right? So I definitely hear you. So what I did was I really, really had to force myself to think hard about the user experience, the learning journey, the user journey. And then as I thought more about the user journey and the learning experience, I realized that there was a piece of content that I had in my document that didn't have to belong in that document. I realized that some of that content could belong in another document that I was writing. So then, of course, one of the things that I did was move that content over. The second thing that I did in that case was, you may remember I mentioned that I was instructed to identify the super badass features our company database had that were similar or up to par with Cockroach. And they wanted to make sure that I called them out in our document so that, people noticed that we were like their competitors. So I thought, okay, she says that displaying a bullet point of features looks too similar. And let's display the data in a different way. So I changed my earlier bullet point list to a table. And I had two columns in my table, and one was features and the other one was description, describing the feature. And presented that to my manager. As you can imagine, definitely looked different now because I had removed part of the content to another document because it made more sense to consolidate. And then I displayed the content in a different way. And then my manager actually ended up saying, oh my God, this table makes way more sense. Oh, now our docs actually even look better than the Cockroach Labs did. So that's how I solved that problem. I really forced myself to think about the learning path. And I thought, okay, the user journey, what do they really need to accomplish in this one document? And I realized that my document was a little bit all over the place because I was trying to accomplish too many things. So then I forced myself as an architect to determine the one goal I had for that document, and the things that were outside of that goal scope, I identified to belong in a different document. Cool. Yes, Rohit, what's up?
Yeah, so now I have a different question. Let's say we are developing a document for async API, or in general, if you're writing for a certain organization, and we are using content or referring to the same content from the same organization. Let's say, for example, I'm writing for async API now, and there's a portion of content that is already present on the organization, like it's already published or it's already written somewhere. So should I, if I'm reusing that content in my content now to write my work, my document, one, if I cite it, like, should I cite it is the first question. Secondly, if I cite it, does it still count under plagiarism? Third thing, first of all, does it even count as plagiarism when you're using the information from,
Yep.
Yeah, I'll come back to that, Shailesh. I'll come back to that. It makes sense, but I'll come back to that. I just want to get this clear. So
No, I got you.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I thought it cut off and I wasn't sure if you were done talking. Yeah, so to answer your question, that is not plagiarism. So if you are writing documentation for Async API docs, let's pretend you are writing a new concept page for your GSA task, right? Like for the Async API document. And
this is actually a place I've been, so I've got this question.
Exactly. And so let's pretend that you identify that you need more information about request reply. And you go to Jonas's PR, which ideally will be merged at some point, at some place, right? And we already know that Jonas's work is going directly into our live docs, like at some point, right? So it's part of the organization. So if you identify a piece of content in what Jonas covered in the documentation that is directly relevant to what you are writing, you can use that content and you don't need to cite or source it. It is not plagiarism because we are all writing in the same organization documentation. However, let me finish. However, if Jonas, merged this document in, and then you, Rohit, were to write a blog post, in that case, I would treat it differently and I would actually cite that this is from a documentation site. But when it's for your same organization in your same documentation, that's fine.
Yep, that clears it. So is it safe to say that when we are writing content under an organization, within the organization, within documentation or whatever, then that does not count as plagiarism? Like I said, using content of one article. And coming to Hridesh's point, we generally use internal links, or we just use hyperlinks back pointing to that document. But there are some cases where it's just like one or two sentences that we need to use. So for that, we don't really link them back to the document, right? So there you just have to either rephrase it or copy it. But if it does not come under plagiarism because it's under the same source and organization, like basically the source becomes the same thing when you're writing on the same organization, then there's no point of even rephrasing. We can just copy paste it. So I want to get
Well,
that.
You are correct technically, but when we're thinking about good writing practices, I would still
Yeah,
encourage
we
you
would rephrase.
not just,
We will
oh,
still
this looks good
rephrase.
enough. Cool, my work is done. Like, no,
Because
like
we still have to, because we still have to put it under the context. We still have to make sure that it is in flow with what we are writing, like before, prior to it and after it. So we still need to rephrase it and make it adjustable for context.
ooh, and something else that I feel like I almost forgot to say, and I don't want to forget is like, let's pretend I asked it to write a very simple, write a simple React app. All right, so here is, I think, the full app.js file, right? Here we go. So as we all know, ChatGPT, GitHub Copilot, all these places where we can generate quick, simple code snippets. And we can even throw our own code snippet and say, this is not working. Can you help me understand why? And sometimes ChatGPT will find the error in your code, right? Like we know that we can use these also for coding, for the coding snippets in our documentation. So another interesting piece about plagiarism is that if you grab a code snippet from, say, ChatGPT, you only have to cite it if it's very detailed and specific to a particular use case. But if it's a generic, like template hello world type of example that it spits out at you, you actually don't have to cite it. Let's find out if we have to cite this example. Let's ask it. Is it if it's too generic and boilerplate, we don't have to cite it. I know it's actually a thing. So let's find out what it says. Yes, it says this code snippet that we provided you is very common and generic. It demonstrates basic functionality. Because it is generic and widely used, it doesn't have any unique or unique or proprietary code. So that's the secret right there. It's a very generic code snippet example, and it has no unique or proprietary code. And in this case, you do not need to cite your code snippet. You would not need to write, this was generated by, version 3.5 ChatGPT OpenAI. However, if it was a lot more complicated and definitely had very unique situation, in that case, you do need to cite your code snippet. But I wanted to bring this out because sometimes you might use these to like generate a quick template. Like maybe I tell Rohit, yo, I need you to write release notes with Jonas. That's your new job. You're going to help him write those release notes. So maybe Rohit is like, oh man, I don't know how to write a release notes. I've never written release notes. I'm new at this. So I could go to ChatGPT and say, give me a basic release notes template. And I want it in Markdown because we work in Markdown. And so here we see that we have a very simple, generic Markdown template for release notes. And you guessed it, because this is not anything that's too unique or specific, it's not proprietary, you do not need to cite the fact that you use this template either, because it's just a template. So a few unique cases there that I know can cause confusion, so I wanted to bring them up. I'm actually going to go for Mafusa next. What's up, Mafusa? You're on mute, by the way. Oh.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I have a question regarding the code. So if I take code from another, for example, if I take code from Spec doc for my DSOD issue, working on DSOD issue.
Oh, wait. I'm sorry. Can you repeat that? Where did you get the code from?
Spec doc.
Oh, the Spec 3 docs. Okay.
Yeah. So if I just directly copy and paste that code in my task, will it be considered as plagiarism?
That's okay. So actually that falls into the same question that Rohit asked earlier, where if you're using content, whether it's written or a code snippet that's already in our documentation, because you are part of the same organization, that is not plagiarism.
Okay, thank
That
you.
said, I would want us as good technical writers, or trying to be good technical writers, to try to identify unique code snippet examples for each tutorial, not just keep reusing the same thing over and over, because that's less helpful for the user experience.
Okay.
Cool. But sometimes you need help with a starting point. So if you grab something from another section of the docs to get you started on creating your own code snippet idea, of course, that's definitely a great idea, and also not plagiarism. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but I want to add one point that if I reuse the same code, for example, I use same code for channel and same code for server also, then maybe it would be easier for user to understand what is going on. So inside their head, they will be working on only on one code. They would be it would be easier to connect the content and connect the code, connect the
Well,
concept.
I would say that that's really more of a technical writing question, not really a plagiarism question. So for now, let's actually that's more of a question that we could philosophize later about, is this a good idea for my document, or is it better if this document has its own code piece? But I think for now, as far as plagiarism itself, we covered you. But I would say that this other question is more of a side topic. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. And do you feel okay now? Does everything make sense so far?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Vaishnavi, what's up?
Yeah, hi. So I had a doubt regarding, the documentation that we would be creating as well. So as a part of the recent community discussions, we wanted to create protocol-specific documentation for the new spec, right? But chances are, let's take Kafka and WebSockets. If you want to create a tutorial following the same real use case, there's a good chance that they'll be very similar in nature. Do you think that'll fall under plagiarism? And is there anything that we could make it, distinct from each other? If we have the same tutorial on the same topic for different protocols, how far would the plagiarism look like? Is that clear?
No, yeah,
Do
that
you mean
definitely makes sense. Sorry, let me
one question? One question I'd like to add on to her. Does
Uh-huh.
she mean in terms of the code snippet being similar or the content
No,
of
she's
the?
talking
No,
about the whole piece,
the
the whole article, the whole document.
yes.
So I do think that's a really good question. And the truth is, Vaishnavi, that is a big part of the job, right? Writing content that is potentially already written about elsewhere, and yet you still have to find your own voice in how you write that content. So in general, that's just something you're always going to have to work with as a technical writer. Now, moving on from that, first of all, I would not want us to be writing the same tutorials as we might find in other documentation. Even if Kafka had a lot of documentation about stuff to do with the sync API, which it doesn't, but let's pretend it did, we would still take the time ourselves with our own brains to think of our own unique example, our own tutorial example that we want to write. So
I just want to clarify there, by same topic I meant using the streetlights example for both Kafka and WebSockets. That's what I meant by similar documentation. So we're using the same use case for both tutorials. Would that be a good approach, or should we look out for different experience?
No, we don't want to use the same example, which this is actually kind of what Mafusa was talking about earlier. We do want to have unique examples in each one, because honestly, I think that'll only be easier for us, the writers, who are still trying to learn and understand how it all works. So if we just reuse the same code snippet, oh yeah, we can say it's a great user experience, but really it's just easier for us. So I really want us to think more about the reality that the community is very wide, it's very diverse. People are doing different things. And so if everyone has different unique cases they're trying to solve, it is not ideal for us to only provide them one example. That's not very helpful. So that's why it is a good practice. We should always be coming up with unique cases and unique examples in all of our documentation. Now, sure, we might have some topics that correlate with others. So like, let's pretend that we have documentation of streaming with Kafka and async API. Yes, of course, Kafka has some documentation about streaming. That's what freaking Kafka does, right? One of the things that it does. So yes, of course, they're going to have, I'm sure, tutorials, guides, whatnot. But while you might want to read them to make sure that we don't accidentally sound too similar to them, as a technical writer, it takes as long as it takes for you to think about, what do I want to write? What's the goal of my document? Like, you really have to be goal oriented. What is the goal of this document? And what is the best example I could come up with that'll be helpful to teach this one, topic. Now, if you're writing like a 4 or 5 part tutorial, like our getting started quick start, then yes, that's different, because that's like those are all the same content piece. They're all quick start, but it's a 4-piece quick start. So they're using the same example throughout. But any new tutorial needs to have its own example. Was that helpful, or did I not address all your questions?
Yes.
Okay,
Got
cool.
it. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, Mr. Ridesh again. What's up?
Just want to add another question. So what I've understood was, if the procedure is same, right? For example, if you are taking Kafka and MQT, and the first initial 4 or 5 steps are same, which is go to your async API, describe the YAML, run the YAML code, yada, yada, yada. So the first 4 or 5 steps are same, right? And then there are a few unique steps, and then there are the same steps again, right? So basically, there is a lot of repetition in both the files, whereas the steps are same. Some steps are different, but majority of the steps are same, right? In that case, wouldn't it make more sense to create a general file describing the same steps? And I'm just asking, what could be a better approach in this case? Because we could write 2 different files, but then we would just be duplicating or replicating our information. But if we don't, then there might be a disconnect of information between in the document.
So first of all, I think that assumes that there is way more documentation out there relevant to us than there actually is. The truth is, like, async API is still a fairly new organization, a new technology. It does not have the time, history, and contributors of, say, like Python or Kafka, And so we are not at a point yet where we really have to worry about that. There is very little documentation live out there about async API, let alone Spec 3. I think we've all noticed that there's no live Spec 3 documentation out there. So I think that your question is a problem that will happen when we're much further down the line in adoption. But at this stage of adoption, we're not really there yet. Like, there's like no docs, dude. We're not there yet.
The frustration of us. Alejandro is expressing the frustration of our everyday writing.
I need to let it out somehow, somewhere. All this energy, this bad energy.
Is Jonas still on the call so that he can see this and understand the frustration we have been going through for the past 2 months while writing these documents?
I'll throw a thought at you out, Rashid. It's been 2 months for you. For me, it's been 10 years. So
yeah, you can rant about that yourself to Jonas. I won't get into it.
Okay, cool. So I think that I can tell that we had a lot of food for thought here. I could also tell by the surprised looks on your faces that some of the points I made were very new to you. Because you were like, I saw the faces go like, what? Oh my God, I can't do that shit. Oops, sorry, we're live. Okay, beep. So I would say that, just remember, like, nobody's perfect. We are all going to make mistakes every single day. So at some point, if you make a mistake in the area of plagiarism where something you write comes across as too plagiarized, like, don't just like stay stuck in guilt mode, because that doesn't help anyone, right? Just think of an action item. So for now, I would like us all to have an action item of, let's really keep in mind and present what plagiarism is, what counts, what doesn't count, now that we've learned a lot more on our session today. And don't just stay with the knowledge that I gave you today, because I just gave you a basic introduction. And you never want to trust me 100%, right? Because I'm wrong every day, same as you. So research what I said, find out if what I said is correct. What if I'm wrong? Okay, so take time yourselves to also study more about proper citation techniques in technical writing. Take the time to research more about plagiarism examples in documentation. Like literally take time to Google typical plagiarism problems in documentation, phrases along those lines. You might be surprised to find people blogging about this topic, or somebody giving ideas and examples of like what to avoid or how they avoided it for their organization, for their program. So try to see if you can find other technical writers to learn from in this area as well. And that's all I have on my end. But do any of you folks have any last questions? Hello, Sergio. Yes, hello. It's always nice to see your face, unlike Jonas's. Ugh, you know how that goes. Okay, so it looks like nobody has any questions, and I think everybody's excited to get off the call. So yeah, we've got 11 minutes of our life back. Thank you for joining. Thanks for all your great questions. And Jonas, thank you for helping us actually start the meeting. See you all later.